For over 2,500 years, people followed a health protocol so effective, it was preserved in the Bible. Not in a wellness book, in scripture. And the deeper modern science studies, inflammation, blood sugar, and processed food, the more the Daniel Protocol looks less ancient and more forgotten. Long before detox trends and biohacking, Daniel followed a 10-day system in Babylon that transformed his health so dramatically it was recorded permanently in Daniel 1. Today, we're uncovering what that protocol actually was and why the modern world quietly walked away from it. Modern culture treats health like an emergency response system. Energy crashes? Take something. Weight gain? Restrict harder. Brain fog? Stimulate more. Poor sleep? Sedate the system. But ancient cultures often approach the body differently, especially in the biblical world. When you study ancient Israelite practices, Babylonian royal diets, and early apothecary traditions, one pattern appears again and again. The body was not viewed as a machine to overpower. It was viewed as a system to steward. That changes everything. Because ancient healing systems were rarely built around intensity. They were built around rhythm, seasonal eating, periods of fasting, simple foundational foods, rest from excess, structured meals, medicinal herbs, water, consistency. Not because ancient people were wellness experts, because they observed patterns over generations. And when something consistently restored strength, clarity, and endurance, they preserved it. That's what makes the story of Daniel so interesting. In Daniel 1:12, Daniel says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink." Now this is important. The Bible is not presenting this as a modern medical prescription. It was a spiritual and cultural decision. But the physical outcome was undeniable. Just a few verses later, Daniel 1:15 says, "At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food." That line has fascinated historians, physicians, theologians, and nutrition researchers for decades. Because the contrast is startling. The royal table represented luxury, stimulation, excess, and indulgence. Daniel's table represented simplicity, and somehow, the simple system produced the stronger result. This wasn't lost knowledge. It was interrupted knowledge. For centuries, ancient civilizations built life around rhythms that protected the human body naturally. Then, modern industrial culture replaced many of those rhythms with convenience, speed, hyper-processing, and constant stimulation. And the effects followed. Not because modern medicine is bad, but because modern living became disconnected from ancient biological patterns. They didn't remove the remedy. They removed the system surrounding it. And that's what makes the Daniel Protocol so relevant today. Not as a trend, as a recovered pattern. The first thing most people misunderstand about the Daniel Protocol is this. Its power wasn't only in what Daniel ate. It was in what he stopped consuming. The royal Babylonian diet was designed to represent status and abundance. Rich meats, heavy wines, refined luxury foods, constant indulgence, and historically, ancient physicians often warned against excessive eating long before modern science understood metabolic disease. Even ancient Jewish writings outside Scripture repeatedly connected overeating with physical decline, sluggishness, and imbalance. Because ancient healers noticed something modern culture often ignores. The body struggles under constant excess. For 10 days, Daniel removed himself from the king's table entirely. No rich royal foods, no constant stimulation, No excess wine. No highly refined luxury eating. Instead, simple plants. Water, foundational nourishment. And this is where modern audiences often miss the deeper insight. The intervention was not aggressive, it was subtractive. Ancient systems often healed by reducing burden before adding intervention. That's a completely different philosophy than modern wellness culture. Today, the instinct is often, add another supplement, add another stimulant, add another protocol. But ancient systems frequently started with simplify, remove excess, restore rhythm. They weren't chasing optimization. They were trying to restore balance. Modern research increasingly shows that heavily processed diets, constant sugar exposure, and chronic overeating can contribute to inflammation, insulin resistance, and metabolic dysfunction. And periods of simplified eating may support blood sugar stability, digestion, inflammatory regulation, energy consistency. Again, not because ancient people understood biochemistry, but because they observed outcomes. What ancient physicians understood through observation, modern science is beginning to explain through metabolism and inflammation research. What's fascinating is that this pattern existed far beyond Daniel. Ancient Mediterranean cultures, Hebrew communities, and early monastic traditions all practiced periods of dietary simplicity. Not occasionally, repeatedly. In many ancient communities, heavy feasting was the exception. Simple eating was normal life. That perspective has almost completely reversed today. For most of human history, processed excess didn't exist. Now it defines the modern food system. But removing overload was only the first layer of the Daniel Protocol. The second layer may be even more important, because it reveals the kinds of foods ancient people depended on daily for strength and endurance. Foods modern culture slowly pushed aside. When modern people hear the word lentils, it barely registers. But in the ancient world, lentils were survival food, strength food, foundation food, and throughout biblical history, they appear constantly. In Genesis 25:29-34, Esau returns exhausted from the field and trades his birthright for Jacob's lentil stew. That sounds strange to modern ears, until you understand what lentils represented historically. Dense nourishment, satiety, stability, stored energy. These foods sustained entire civilizations, and ancient healers understood their value long before nutrition science existed. In ancient Israel and surrounding regions, lentils and pulses were soaked carefully, slow cooked, combined with herbs, eaten with coarse grains, consumed daily, not occasionally, daily. And that repetition matters, because ancient systems didn't rely on intensity. They relied on consistency. They didn't use these foods as health hacks. They built life around them. For women especially, this kind of foundational nourishment mattered enormously. Many women in the modern world live in a constant cycle of blood sugar, crashes, fatigue, cravings, energy instability. But older food systems were often slower, steadier, and less chemically overstimulating. That difference changes hormonal stress dramatically over time. Modern science now recognizes legumes as highly supportive for metabolic health, satiety, digestion, cholesterol balance, blood sugar regulation, mainly because of their fiber, mineral content, and slower digestion profile. Again, Science arrived later. The pattern came first. This was common knowledge long before it became clinical knowledge. What disappeared wasn't the lentil itself. It was the relationship people had with foundational foods. Modern culture shifted toward ultra-processed snacks, refined flour products, constant convenience eating, hyper-palatable foods engineered for overconsumption. And slowly, the stable foods that sustained people for centuries stopped being central. They didn't remove the plant. They removed the dependence on it. So now you've seen two major layers of the Daniel Protocol: the removal of excess, the restoration of foundational foods. But there's one final layer ancient systems understood deeply, and modern culture almost completely lost: the importance of metabolic rhythm. One of the most overlooked details in biblical food traditions is the repeated use of bitter herbs. Modern diets are overwhelmingly dominated by sweetness, refined starches, engineered flavor intensity. But ancient diets included bitterness constantly, and bitterness played an important role in digestion and metabolic regulation. In Exodus 12:8, the Passover meal specifically includes bitter herbs alongside lamb and unleavened bread. Historically, bitter herbs commonly included plants like chicory, endive, wild lettuce, dandelion greens, horehound. These were not decorative foods. Ancient apothecaries frequently used bitter plants to support digestion, appetite regulation, and internal balance. These herbs were eaten regularly, not as supplements, as part of meals. And bitterness naturally slows consumption, stimulates digestion, and changes the body's relationship with food itself. That matters more than people realize, because the modern food system is designed around maximum stimulation. Ancient food systems often created moderation naturally. They weren't engineering foods to override hunger. They were building meals that worked with the body. Modern researchers now study bitter compounds for their role in digestive signaling, glucose regulation, appetite response, gut function. Again, ancient people didn't understand receptors or hormones, but they observed outcomes repeatedly over generations. What ancient healers preserved through tradition, modern science is slowly rediscovering through physiology. The Daniel Protocol was never just about healthy foods. It was about restoring biological rhythm, simpler eating, steadier nourishment, reduced overload, digestive balance, and metabolic calm. They weren't trying to dominate the body. They were trying to stop disrupting it. If you step back and look closely at the Daniel Protocol, the pattern becomes clear. First, the removal of excess. Then, the return to foundational foods. Then, the restoration of internal rhythm through simpler, less overstimulating nourishment. Different layers, same system. Consistency over intensity. Rhythm over stimulation. Stewardship over excess. And what makes this so powerful today is that modern science is increasingly validating many of the same patterns ancient people observed naturally. Not because ancient cultures were primitive, but because they lived closer to biological reality. This wasn't a wellness trend. It was a way of life. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Daniel Protocol. The modern world became louder, faster, more processed, more overstimulating. And many of the ancient rhythms that once protected human health quietly disappeared underneath convenience culture. But the knowledge itself never fully vanished. It survived in scripture, in ancient traditions, in forgotten food systems, in practices people once depended on daily. This wasn't lost knowledge. It was knowledge that stopped being passed down. And now, piece by piece, modern science is beginning to rediscover what ancient people already observed through experience. Not to replace modern medicine, but to reconnect modern life with wisdom that sustained people long before modern health culture existed. If this gave you something valuable, subscribe. Next video, we're uncovering one of the most overlooked biblical remedies for joint pain, a plant ancient healers used for centuries, that quietly disappeared from modern kitchens within a single generation. I'll see you there.